Hey guys, it's Filter SC here, and I'm back for episode number 8 of my Heart of the Swarm Bronze to Masters Terran series. In this particular episode, we're going to be talking a lot about scouting, and kind of how you can do it, where you can, and that kind of stuff. The first thing I kind of want to mention, though, is scouting is one of the more overrated aspects of the game, and it definitely only really applies to like Diamond and Masters level players. If you're trying to scout for anything more than just a simple cheese and platinum, you're not going to have that much fun because a lot of players are simply not executing builds properly. And things that should make sense don't. They'll do something like go for a Stargate and they'll make like Void Rays out of it for no reason in a PvZ. So it's really important that you're just scouting for kind of early cheese in those early leagues, and then as you start to get to Diamond and Masters, you start branching out a little bit. Now for the game in the background is a TVZ. And it's a game I'm pretty happy with, where I put the Zerg under a ton of pressure, never was really under any duress myself, and hopefully you enjoy it. Anyway guys, let's move on to the episode. Now scouting is the single most overrated aspect of the game in StarCraft 2. People put way too much emphasis on being able to scout properly because in pro games scouting is super important. But for your average Joe playing on ladder, it's simply not, because a lot of players are going to miss timings. They're going to have a general idea of what they want to do with the build. Say they saw something in GSL and they want to try to emulate it, but they don't really know how to do it properly. So their timings are going to be like 3 and 4 minutes late. Everything's just going to be a complete mess. Really good example is the third pylon rule against Protoss. So typically if Protoss only has 2 pylons when you scout their base after barracks, what that usually means is they're going for either like a 4-gate if they only have 1 gas, or if they've taken both gas, it's usually like a proxy oracle, or proxy something, right? Like they can do proxy robotics facilities and all sorts of crazy stuff. Or even, just a really good example is the Tails DT drop is actually a 2 pylon build. So it'll look like a proxy oracle play, if you don't make sure to confirm the timing on the natural. So there's a few different pieces that all kind of tie in. That being said, when you're not dealing with a player who is, Masters level or Grandmasters level and better, quite typically they don't understand the build they're trying to do properly, and their timings and stuff are going to be messed up. So if you're playing against a Gold League player, he might just forget his third pylon, and then you go ahead and you prepare for a 4-gate, and he doesn't 4-gate you because that's not what he was trying to do. He just messed up his build completely, right? So you have to be really careful on how you're reading things and what you're looking for, and kind of how you react to things. Once again, scouting is a really overrated part of the game, and it really doesn't start applying until the later levels. And one big thing with scouting as well is it comes with experience. You'll start to be able to recognize things a little bit more clearly as you read up on guides, you read up on builds. I read up on Protoss builds all the time because I want to know what I should be looking for when I'm scouting. That being said, if you're playing in Gold League, chances are the Protoss players' timings and stuff are going to be completely different from what they should be. So if you're looking for something very specific, you're probably not going to find it, even if they are trying to do that build that they just saw in the GSL or the build they just read on Team Liquid. It's simply not going to be tight, and it's going to be hard to get the information you want. Alright, so when you go to scout your opponent, it's really important that you know what you're looking for and you're scouting towards the weakness of your build. So some examples of that are, if you're not getting an early bunker, and you're planning on delaying that a lot, when you're scouting you're trying to find out if they're getting an early zealot. If they skip the early zealot, there's other things that are available to them like proxy oracles and things like that. But if they do get that really fast zealot, it's not to clear out your SCV, because your SCV is going to be fine, meandering and running through their base. But it does mean you're going to need to get your bunker much faster at your base, because if he walks across the map with a zealot, a mothership core, and a stalker, you could be in a lot of trouble. So when I'm out scouting, that's what I'm looking for, because I want to know if I should have my bunker up basically before my command center even comes up, or if I can delay that bunker a little bit and get my command center first. So all you do is you scout towards the weakness of your build, so you can make kind of small adjustments and get things figured out. It's really important that you're not going there and you're not trying to scout and figure out exactly which build the Protoss player is doing, because you're never really going to know, right? It doesn't matter if they're Protoss, if they're Zerg, if they're Terran. It really doesn't matter. Like if I'm scouting a Terran player, what I'm most interested in is that Terran player opening up with a Reaper. Because typically right now myself, I open up with Reapers all the time. So on like a 4-player map, I'm still going to SCV scout. I want to find out if he is opening with a Reaper, so that I can move out with 2 Reapers instead of just 1, and hopefully pick off his Reaper when he's miscontrolling it, or it's in the middle of the map, or it's out of place. It's really, really important though that you scout towards what your build's good at, or sorry, scout to the weakness of your build. You want to be aware of the potential things your opponent can do to you, and take the countermeasures that are necessary within your own gameplay in order to hold against what he's doing. Okay, so with that in mind, you want to keep your scouting very simple. You want to have kind of a few points that you're checking on each race, and I'll go into detail on that a little bit later on in the video, but for right now, all I want you to do is just remember, keep it very simple. It's going to be very rare that you're able to pinpoint exactly what your opponent's build is from the information that he's going to give you, so there's no point in trying to figure out if it is a 4-gate, if it's a blink stock or all-in, if it's XYZ. There's all sorts of different ways you have to prepare against different things, so it's important that you kind of group things into different categories, like, you know, a strong attack at the front. Do I need detection or turrets against like an Oracle DT play? You want to kind of group things off and keep your scouting very, very simple, and look for kind of key things in your opponent's build that's going to help you stay safe and prepare against whatever he's planning, whether that's a 1-base timing attack, whether that's a 2-base play, or like a lot of Zergs right now are doing like huge Ling run buys, as well as like kind of big roach plays early on. So it's really important that you keep it very simple and you know what you're looking for. Alright, so before we go into complete detail, I want to talk about a couple different things here. One thing is the 2-player versus 4-player map scouting. If you are opening up with a Reaper play, you still need to scout with an SCV on 4-player maps. And it's really important you do this so that your Reaper, especially in like a TVT, so that your Reaper is not trying to scout a base on the opposite side of the map on Whirlwind, while his Reaper scout you, because he gets a little bit more lucky, he's able to kill you. If you know where your Reaper should be going, you're going to be in a lot better shape defensively to handle, you know, your opponent's Reapers. So on a 4-player map, you still have to SCV scout. And sometimes on a 4-player map you have to adjust and scout a little bit earlier. A lot of times against the Terran, you might have to scout like right at your depot rather than kind of halfway through your barracks type deal. Alright, so the next thing we're going to mention really quickly is just scans. Now, by and large, you want to save your scans and be very careful with how you use them, but there are certain timings and certain situations where it's good to scan. So a really good example is if you are a Terran player, as you start to get all your techs, so you have your engineering bays, you have your several barracks, you have your factory and all that, usually by around 8 minutes as things start to pop up, it's okay to scan your opponent's main and just check for what kind of tech path he's doing so you kind of know how to abuse him. It's one of the easiest ways to get information on Terran is just throw one scan, you'll know kind of what's coming, you'll be able to prepare for it properly. Very, very simple and straightforward. Now, when you're talking about scanning a Zerg player, or you're talking about scanning a Protoss player, you have to be a lot more careful. When you do go to scan a Zerg player, one thing you should already know is if he has a 3rd base or not. You should be checking that with, you know, your Hellions or something like that. And if you haven't seen any roaches, you've only seen a few lings and no banelings, you know, he might be doing something like going for a really fast 2-base meter rush, which is very dangerous for him to do, but still a possibility. In that type of situation, you would just scan his main and check to see if he's already got a lair up. You might get lucky and see the Spire as well, but you can kind of see how much gas he's mined and get an idea of why he might be saving it. If he's saving a ton of gas, chances are he is going for mutas. So it's okay to scan your opponent, but you want to be a little bit cheap with it, and you want to be scanning looking for something specific. There has to be a reason to scan. So if a Zerg opponent's going for like a 2-base muta and you're going to be short on Marines, you know, you might be a little bit scared of that. That's the situation where it's okay to scan, just to confirm so you can get a couple missile turrets and keep yourself safe. The same sort of thing applies against a Protoss player. Typically, you can gather all the information you want by just sending an SCV at a Protoss player, and seeing, you know, what his army composition looks like at the front, and it's very simple and straightforward. You know, if there's a lot of zealots and, you know, only a small number of sentries, and his army looks like he doesn't have stalkers protecting for a drop, because that does happen where they simply split up their army. There's certain things you want to look for when you do send that SCV out that'll give you a tip off if it is Colossus play or if it is Templar play, because Protoss can hide pretty much everything in their base, so a scan is not usually very effective on them, though it can give you a good idea. Alright, so I want to talk about scouting a Terran player. When you do go to scout a Terran player, basically all you're looking for is to make sure he's not doing like a 1-base all-in. One of the most important things you want to do is find his command center. He'll usually build it on the high ground, so if you have a Reaper play, you know, you can just run your Reaper into his base, check out basically all his buildings, find out if he has an armory, so he might be doing a Hellbat drop, Or if he has a command center, he's expanding, you're fairly safe, you're going to be able to pull the game into a macro game. Scouting a Terran player is actually very, very easy to do when you go for a Reaper play, especially on certain maps where, like Star Station, where it's wide open. You just pick kind of a random spot, you should be able to jump up into his main and get in no problem. Things will be very easy. But your main key with a Terran player is finding that command center. If you don't find the command center and he's already getting something like a factory up, or his factory's already on a reactor, for instance, when you go in, and there's no command center, like things like Widow Mines all of a sudden become a little bit more of a factor. But it's really important when you're scouting a Terran player to confirm that he does have that command center, because if he doesn't have the command center, you're going to have to take extra precautions, like maybe having a missile turret in your mineral line, like getting a bunker up to the front so you'll be able to hold any kind of 1-1-1 type attack he does, or if he does like Hellbat drops, it's nice to have a turret in your mineral line because that'll definitely throw him off a little bit and prevent him from doing a little bit of micro that he wants to do. When you go to scout a Zerg player right now, it's very difficult because Zergs are heavily favoring Zergling speed early on. But when you go scout a Zerg's base, all you're looking for is you just check to see if he has gas, and if he doesn't have gas already, that's awesome, you're going to be pretty safe. If he's taking gas and it's a normal timing with his pool, you have to be a little bit careful with things like maybe making a Zergling safe bunker, which is where you tuck it away. You don't make the bunker as part of your wall, and you tuck it away so it's easy to repair, and he can't get very much surface area on it, and that'll kind of help you out a little bit. Or maybe he's going for a roach play. So what you have to do in those situations is either try to confirm a third later on, or take a little bit of map control off him, so you can see either that big Ling Bane bus coming, or you can see a bunch of roaches coming across the map. If you do open with like a Hellion opener, you're going to get that map control against like any kind of big Ling play, or Baneling bus. You're going to be pretty safe on that if you're using Hellions. But a roach play can be very dangerous, so it's important that you are able to scout that out with your Hellions. You kind of take advantage of some of the tips you can get off Zerg. But the big one is third base and like, are they making Zerglings, that kind of stuff. The other thing too is if he's running like a Ling up to your base at like 630 or so, and he doesn't have Zergling speed, that's when you should start worrying about roaches coming out of his base. So, just a few little tips that you can use against Zerg. Zerg is a very difficult race to scout right now because they simply have so many good openers with like a ton of speedlings. They can do Baneling bus. They can do like an early roach timing that's very difficult. It won't necessarily kill you, but it'll kill off a bunch of your SCVs because they can just burrow and heal, and it becomes really, really annoying and aggravating. But again, scouting a Zerg, not overly difficult. It can be done. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is scouting a Protoss player. When you're scouting a Protoss player, you essentially go into their base and you want to see, are they getting a Zealot? If they do get a Zealot, you have to get a bunker at home to be really, really safe. Even if they skip the Zealot, you still have to be a little bit careful, but your bunker can usually come after your command center in that case, and you're going to be okay. If they skip the Zealot and the Stalker feels a little bit late, and then there's no pressure, there's nothing like the Mothership Core and Stalker are not trying to pressure your front at all, that's when you need to start being a little bit worried about some sort of proxy, especially when they've taken both of their gases, right? If they're not getting a Mothership Core until a little bit later, that's usually when like a proxy play will come, or like a DT play will come, and the next kind of step with that is just confirming if they've expanded at 5 minutes. If the Protoss player hasn't expanded by 5 minutes, and you do this by just running your SCV into his natural, the same SCV that did the initial scouting, you just pull it back, take it to his third, then you go check his natural to confirm an expansion. It's very simple and straightforward. But if they haven't expanded by about that 5 minute mark, that's when you want to start getting a little bit worried about potential proxy plays. The earliest you can have an Oracle flying over your base killing all your SCVs is about 5 minutes and 40 seconds, but that requires a huge cut on the Protoss behalf, so they really have to do damage with more than one Oracle to make it pay off. If they're not like doing the hardcore all-in version with a whole bunch of Oracles trying to kill all your stuff, typically the Oracle will come about 6:30. So if they haven't done the expand, that's when you want to make sure you get your engineering bay up so that you're going to be safe against an Oracle play. If you've only seen like 2 pylons and they don't have very much chrono boost, or they're already using it on a building that's not necessarily there, that's where you want to be looking for again the potential proxy, potential things like DD play and stuff like that. It's all kind of it's very difficult to scout a Protoss properly right now, but your big thing is to confirm if he expanded or if he didn't expand. And then other things come into play, like what map is it? For instance, if you're playing a Protoss player on Star Station and he's taking both of his gases very, very early, He skipped the Zealot, but he does have like 3 pylons in his base. And something like a Blink Stalker all in becomes a lot more dangerous and a much larger threat than it otherwise would be. And you're going to have to prepare completely differently for that than you would against like an Oracle all in. So you have to start, really playing a lot of games, getting that experience if you want to learn how to scout a Protoss properly. Even for somebody like me who's I played a ton of Wings, I played quite a bit in Heart of the Swarm. It's very difficult to scout properly right now, but you have to be a little bit careful. And you know what? Every now and then you're going to get it wrong. Sometimes it's because your opponent made a mistake in his build order that threw you off. Sometimes it's just because you guessed what he was trying to do wrong, and it's going to get you killed. Situations in games like that, pretty much just ignore and move on. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this particular episode of Bronze to Masters. Hopefully I gave you some ideas in your scouting and what you should be looking for. And hopefully you understand that a big part of scouting is experience, because things are going to change over time as builds change. So the more you play and the more you kind of look for certain things when you're scouting, the better you're going to get at it. It is one of the most difficult skills to learn though, and pro players spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. It's one of the biggest defining gaps between like a super high level Korean player and kind of like a mid-level foreigner, where the super high level Korean player will know what the build is based entirely on how much gas the player's already mined and that kind of stuff. Obviously that's not really going to apply too much to an average Masters player, but just keep in mind, as you play and get more experience, you're going to get better and better at scouting. Hopefully you enjoyed this particular episode. Hopefully it gave you some ideas on how you should be scouting and what to look for when you do scout.